of you. On behalf of the Sri Lanka College of Internal Medicine, I welcome all of you to this peer learning forum webinar. And this is the first time I think we are using a PLF in a form of a webinar. So thank you very much for joining us at the outset. We have 18 members participating, and this webinar is on dyslipidemia. We have 3 speakers, and Dr. KVC Janaka, consultant physician from Sri Jadavpur General Hospital, will talk to us on CV risk assessment, targets and goals, followed by Dr. Chamila Mettananda, consultant physician and senior lecturer in pharmacology. She will talk to us on pharmacological management of dyslipidemia. And finally, Dr. Priyamani Jayasekara, consultant physician and senior lecturer in medicine from Kothawala Defense University, will talk to us on management of dyslipidemia in different clinical settings. So we have covered all aspects, current and relevant aspects of, we are going to cover all current and relevant aspects in dyslipidemia. I'm sure the membership and the participants will benefit. So without much ado, may I hand over the webinar podium to Dr. Janaka to talk to us on CV risk assessment, targets and goals. Over to you, Janaka.
Thank you very much, sir. I'll be discussing about the lipid management, mainly the cardiovascular risk assessment. I hope you can see my slides. Can you all see?
Not yet, Janaka.
Not yet, Janaka.
Yeah. Can you?
Right. Fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you see now? Yeah. Now, cardiovascular risk is, now when you go back, we know that most of the people, like from Framingham study, about 35% of the patients who had cardiovascular event had normal cholesterol. So we know there are so many other risk factors causing cardiovascular disease other than the cholesterol alone. So when you take the risk factors, there are large number of risk factors. Some are predisposing factors like age, gender, family history, and the genetic background, which we can't do anything about. Then there are risk factors that can be modified, like smoking, diet, alcohol, and the lifestyle. Then we have these metabolic risk factors like dyslipidemia, hypertension, obesity, diabetes, and things like that. Then there are markers of development of this cardiovascular disease like calcium score, then the catheterization results, stress test, LVH on echo, and inflammatory markers and things like that. So we have so many risk factors. Now, when you take the risk factors, sorry about this slight derangement, but in the Interheart study, they found that it's mainly the lipids have the highest highest odds ratio for people to develop cardiovascular disease. It has an attributable risk of 49%. This is ApoB and ApoA, mainly the non-HDL cholesterol. Then the smoking, hypertension, and diabetes are the other major risk factors. And the lifetime risk of death from a cardiovascular disease is proportionate to having the number of risk factors. If you have in this study, you can see, which was published in NAGA. When you have more than 2 risk factors, your risk of having a cardiovascular disease is very high, and it goes down when you control your risk factors. So then how do you calculate this risk? You can just say 1, 2, 3 number of risk factors, but you can give some value to each risk factor. So there are so many calculators used in various countries. So I'll describe few of them. Then the systematic coronary risks estimator or SCORE is used in the European Union or European Society of Cardiology. They use the score system. Then QRIS is the database based risk chart or calculator used in UK. JBS is Joint British Society Risk Calculator, again online based calculator used for in UK. Then adult ACVD is the American chart. Then we have the WHO region specific or country specific charts and so on. So we have so many risk factors that can be used, risk calculators that can be used. When you take the systemic coronary risk evaluation or the score, it is based on the European population, but it has a significant number of Asians also involved, but is mainly the European population. And it is based on the a hard endpoint or deaths, cardiovascular deaths. Most of the other risk calculators use cardiovascular events. Now this is cardiovascular deaths, so the validity is more because they are recorded. Then we have an electronic based system also, and they have calibrated this into different countries, right? So each country can use their country specific coronary score charts. Or actually, when they use the charts, they have use it to high and low risk countries. But then when they use the online, the hard score, they have the country specific risk chart. Then this is the ESC risk calculator risk chart. You can see now when you use a chart, you can't have so many parameters. The number of parameters that can be used is limited. So they use most of the charts use the total cholesterol, the blood pressure, age, whether the person is smoking or not, and the sex. This is the American ACVD risk chart. This is the Q risk. Q risk also analyze. It uses a lot of parameters, and it assesses the risk of heart attack or a stroke. Then this is the WHO chart. The difference here is they have used charts for people with diabetes and people without diabetes. So two different charts for people with diabetes and people without diabetes. This is what we use in our national program, the region specific chart. So with most of the charts, cardiovascular risk is not calculated in patients who already have. So these charts are for primary prevention. So secondary prevention, it's not used. So if they have had cardiovascular disease, you don't have to calculate the cardiovascular risk because they already have it. Then patients with diabetes, again, we don't use the risk charts except for the WHO chart, which has a separate chart for patients with diabetes. Then if somebody is having very high cholesterol, again, you don't have to risk assess because they are already high risk if the LDL is more than 190. And if somebody is having chronic kidney disease, again, they are high risk. And charts are not applicable. When you assess the risk, they are categorized into different risk levels. Now, according to the ESC, there's a very high risk level, high risk, moderate, and low risk. So high risk is people who already have disease. You don't have to. These people don't fall into classification. I mean, you don't have to apply charts to these patients, but they are already having high risk because of having stroke or heart disease, or if the CT angiogram shows multivessel disease, they are high risk. They are very high risk. And patients with diabetes with target organ damage or 3 major risk factors or type 1 diabetes more than 20 years is taken as very high risk. And those without any of the above, if they have a calculated risk of more than 10%, they are taken as very high risk. Now, you have to keep in mind this 10% of death is what they use, right? Not of having a hard cardiac event. Then CKD, GFR less than 30 is again very high risk according to European chart. Then ESC, high risk is again when the total cholesterol is very high, LDL cholesterol is high, more than 190, and high blood pressure. And patient with diabetes, more than 10 years duration, and having one more risk factors. CKD, again, calculated score 5 to 10 is taken as high risk. Then the moderate risk is diabetes, patients with diabetes, not having any other cardiovascular risk. Or the calculated score is between 1 to 5. Low risk is people with risk less than 1%. Then again, we know that all these calculators use only a few risk factors, but there are so many other risk factors that we know. So those risk factors, I'm not going to go through each of these, can be used as risk modifiers. Now, if somebody falls into low risk, and if that patient is having some other risk factors also, that low risk may go up to become a moderate risk. So again, similarly in the American guideline also, they have given risk enhancers which you can use to modify the calculated risk. These are not used in the risk calculation, but you can modify your risk calculation with these. The clinician can do that. Then when to use the ultrasound and the coronary artery calcification. Now, if somebody falls into moderate or low risk, then there is a place for coronary artery calcification. If the coronary artery calcium score is more than 100 Agaston, they or if they fall above the 75th percentile for the age, they can go up one score. Like if they are in low risk, they become moderate risk if it is high. Or if the calcium score is low, the moderate risk person can downgrade to low risk. The importance of that is in deciding whether to continue, whether the patient needs to be on statin or not. So what are the issues we have with risk calculation? The issues are the chart should be used with the clinician's knowledge regarding the local situation. And these charts will sometimes, if the country is improving their health system, they will overestimate the risk of the people. If the country's health system is deteriorating, then they will underestimate the risk. Then most of the data has problems with the geographical problems, like we don't have the local data, we have the European data. So these charts are suitable for non-Western population like ours is an issue. And some of the data for these like risk factors are not used in these charts, like family history and diabetes. Sometimes you can't use them. You can't use them to quantify. Then there's an issue with the age, especially younger patients, because their age is they're low in the age, they get a low risk, low 10-year risk of having when you calculate, they get a low 10-year risk. But when you take a individual patient compared to some other one, he may be having high relative risk of having a heart disease. Now, to correct that, the ESC has introduced relative risk chart. Now we know the commonly used risk chart calculate the absolute risk. Now this is a relative risk chart. What you do is you calculate the risk of a patient say if this calculate and you get 4, if say 40-year-old male with a systolic of 140 and a smoker, he has a risk of 4. Then you take this 4 and get the age of a person with this risk. So you can tell the patient that even though you are 40 years, you have the risk of a 60-year-old man. So this is how you use the relative risk chart. And sometimes when you have other risk factors, like obese subjects, and when there's a strong family history, the risk may be higher. So I'm not going to go into details. So these charts can be applied universally to every. So you always need to have your clinical judgment. Then lipid lowering, we know the total cholesterol correlate with the death rate. Then again, we know that the LDL again correlate with the cardiovascular events. And so many trials have shown that lowering cholesterol, you can reduce the cardiovascular event. And even when you use high intensity statin compared to low intensity statin, there's a benefit of cardiovascular death reduction. Now, for example, statin alone. Now this is statin alone. You compared with the ezetimibe and statin, there is a significant reduction, absolute reduction of LDL. Say 57.5% reduction of LDL compared with the statin alone. So that correlates with a 19% more reduction of major cardiovascular events with the recent trial data. And the number needed to treat. Now, that is an important thing. Number needed to treat is higher when the patient, now for example, when you take this, when the risk of major cardiovascular event is low, like in the Jupiter trial or ASCOT trial, when it is about 10%, you need to treat about 80 people to get a benefit. When the risk is very high, like in the 4S trial, you need a small number of patients to be treated to gain benefit. So when you treat high risk people, you get more benefit. And when you go lower, you get additional benefit. I'm not going to go into this. So because of that, the lipid targets are made depending on the risk of having a heart disease. Now it's like a road sign. If you the speed signs, if your risk of getting an accident is high, you go slow. So if you're having a high risk of having a heart disease, you reduce your cholesterol level to a lower level. Depending on that, I am not going to describe this chart. This available ESC chart. According to risk categories, if the patient is having very high risk, your target is LDL cholesterol of 55. If they are high risk, your target is LDL of 70. If moderate risk, LDL of 100. And if you are low risk, LDL of 160. This is the ESC recommendation. Similarly, American recommendation, they go on the statin intensity. If high risk, you go for high intensity statin. Intermediate risk, moderate high intensity statin. And borderline, no or moderate intensity. You can think of the risk modifiers. And if the risk is low, you don't give any statin. Then Dr. Chamila will continue to update you on the treatments available. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Can you all see me, see my slides?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Janakan sir. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about management of dyslipidemia. So we know there are several guidelines on the management of dyslipidemia. So the latest one is from NICE in 2020, and we have a ESC guideline in 2019 and an American Heart Association guideline in 2018. So the crux of my talk is pharmacological management of any dyslipidemia. The treatment is a statin. Right? I'm going to say why. Now, why? So we say any dyslipidemia, the treatment is statin. There is no controversy between guidelines. Every guideline agreeing that the treatment is a statin. So the reason is, like, if we reduce 1 millimole of cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, you can get the major cardiovascular events will reduce by 22%. And if you look at the cardiac deaths, it will be 20% reduction. And if you look at strokes, it will reduce 17% of stroke. And the total mortality, it will reduce by 10%. This is when you observe the patients over 5 years. So this is the reason why we say, and the guidelines say, statins is the treatment for hyperlipidemia. Next. Apart from that, statins do have a lot more other benefits. We call them pleiotropic benefits of statins. Statins, they reduce angiogenesis, they reduce oxidative stress, and there is a benefit in avoiding apoptosis, and it reduces fibrosis, it reduces proliferation of liver cells, and then it acts on the endothelial dysfunction, so it reduces inflammation. It has an effect on platelet activation and coagulation. So likewise, statins do have a lot other benefits as well. Now, so we know the treatment is a statin. Then what statin to use is the next question. And it is found in trials that this statin benefit is largely a class effect. Whether you give atorvastatin or rosuvastatin, it doesn't matter. It's a statin, so it's a class effect. And this effect is mainly driven by the absolute reduction in cholesterol level, LDL cholesterol level. And also another thing to remember is, like this, finally what we want is a risk reduction in cardiovascular diseases. This risk reduction is more if the cardiovascular risk, the baseline cardiovascular risk of the patient was high. Then so like if we give statins, the benefit is more if we give it to a high risk patient than we give it to a low risk patient. Therefore, what statin to use? It has to be a high intensity statin and a low cost one. That is the recommendation. Now, what is a high intensity statin? I know everybody knows that, but just for completeness sake, a high intensity statin is a statin that can reduce LDL cholesterol from baseline to more than 40 to 50%. So in our practice, the examples we have of high intensity statins are either atorvastatin 20 or above dose, or rosuvastatin 10 milligram or above. Now next problem is, like, okay, we decide to give statin. No, the treatment is a statin, but how do we decide whether to give statins or not? That depends on several things. As Janaka said, the main thing is the 10-year cardiovascular risk. And also we go by the absolute LDL cholesterol level and whether they have had a past history of a atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. Now, before starting a statin, again, this is not new to you. So like we need to exclude secondary causes of hyperlipidemia like alcohol consumption, diabetes mellitus, and hypothyroidism. And if those are there, we have to treat them as well. And in an examination, so we have to check the blood pressure, BMI, their fasting blood sugar level. That is important to risk calculate. And a thyroxine level, like if you think the patient has hypothyroidism, that is also need to be done. ALT level, I wanted to talk about this specifically because, like, I mean, there is no hard and fast rule as saying that you need to do an ALT level before starting statins. However, like, it is best practice to do a ALT level before starting statins, because in case, like, we'll say after 3 months of treating with a statin, you find that the patient has a high ALT level, and that may be attributed to statins, but it is not actually. So to avoid that confusion, it's better to have a baseline ALT at the beginning. And creatinine and eGFR is needed for us to decide on the dose. This is especially in complicated patients with renal impairment. Now, what are the indications for statins? There comes the difference. Like, there is no doubt about what to give, it's a statin, but the indications are different in different guidelines, not always very slight. There are slight differences. Now, for statins, for secondary prevention of cardiovascular diseases, there is no doubt. Everybody agree statins are beneficial. So high intensity statins are recommended in all the guidelines. Now, coming on to statins in primary prevention of non-diabetic patients, again, there is no much confusion. So all the guidelines are in line. So if they have an absolute LDL level of more than 190, they are taken as high risk and they should be on a statin. And the other indication is if any individual has a high cardiovascular risk, depending on whatever the score that you are using. But if they are at a high cardiovascular risk, then they should be on a statin for secondary prevention. Now, talking about people, so all these like the risk stratification score systems, they stratify people between 40 and 80 years. Right? So if you look at WHO score, it goes from 35 to 80 years, likewise. So because all the statin trials have been done in people between that age group. Therefore, you can't just extrapolate and tell the benefits. So therefore, that's why in guidelines, you don't talk about like the direct indications of for statins in people above 75 to 80 years. Because and the other reason is, like, when we talk about an 80-year-old man, we have to consider the other factors as well, like polypharmacy, frailty, and their life expectancy. So all those need be considered. But there are now recent trials, there is evidence for like beneficial effects of statin in people above 80 years, and it actually has shown to reduce non-fatal myocardial infarctions. But considering all those, whether to give a statin to an 80-year-old man, it's an individualized decision. You have to weigh the benefits and risks and then decide whether to give a statin to them or not. Now, this is where the confusion comes. Statins in primary prevention of cardiovascular diseases in diabetic patients. So the three guidelines are slightly different, but I'll quickly let you know the differences. If you look at the AHA guideline, they say all diabetics, regardless of risk stratification, they should be on a statin. Whereas in ESC and NICE guidelines, they recommend risk stratification. So according to ESC guidelines, high risk, very high risk diabetic patients, they should be on a statin and their cholesterol level should go down by 50%. And there the goal is 55. We have to reduce the cholesterol level to less than 55 milligrams per deciliter. And in diabetic patients with high risk, not the very high risk, the high risk people, they also should be on statins, and their goal is to reduce it up to less than 70 milligrams per deciliter. And the ESC, they consider type 1 diabetics separately, and whether they are high risk or very high risk, again, they recommend to reduce LDL cholesterol level by 50%, and the goal is 70 milligrams per deciliter. And the latest guideline is the NICE guideline, which was published very recently in 2020. There, they again recommend to risk stratify patients. And if the risk is more than 10% according to their Q risk, they recommend to start on a statin in type 2 diabetics. But in type 1 diabetics, there are other risk identifying factors, like if they are older than 40 years, or if they have had diabetes for more than 10 years, or if they have nephropathy, or if they have any other cardiovascular risk factors, then they should be on a statin. That's the recommendation of statin in different guidelines. Now, now we have started statins in a patient. So then the next important thing in the pharmacological management is the continuation and the follow-up monitoring. So important thing to stress is statin dose should be increased up to the highest tolerated dose to reach the treatment targets depending on the patient's baseline cardiovascular risk. Following starting statins or after increasing statin dose, it's best to repeat a lipid profile in about 4 to 12 weeks time to see the effect of statin, your dose. And if the targets are not achieved, you have to titrate the dose up until the target is achieved. Once the target is achieved, you can repeat the repeat profiles depending on you can decide it depending on the patient as well. Like it can be done 3 to 12 monthly depending on the need. And the other important thing I want to stress is there is no need to repeat the ALT or a CPK level unless the patient is symptomatic. And we all know we discontinue statins in people who are symptomatic with either an ALT rise of more than 3 times of the upper limit of normal or the CPK rise of more than 10 times of upper limit of normal. These are the treatment targets that Janaka also mentions. For secondary prevention, you have to reduce LDL cholesterol for less than 55. And in primary prevention, if they are high risk, we reduce it less than 70%. Intermediate risk, we have to reduce it less than 100. And if the patients are at low risk, then it is less than 116 milligrams per deciliter. Now, next important thing related to pharmacology is the adverse effects. We know there are common adverse effects. So like the statin-associated muscle symptoms and transaminitis are the 2 common adverse effects we have been experiencing throughout the invent of statins. So talking about statin-associated muscle symptoms, actually this is 10 to 15% in observational studies. But the randomized studies have shown that actual risk is less than the actual prevalence is less than this, and they think it is probably in the observational studies the patients know that they are on a statin because they are not blind, whereas in randomized control studies they don't know whether they are on statins or not. So they say it is probably a nocebo effect, like placebo. It's a nocebo effect that they are not seeing, and they are not seeing much increase prevalence of statin-associated muscle symptoms in randomized studies. But the most dangerous statin-associated muscle symptom is rhabdomyolysis, and it is very rare. It is, if at all, like 1 to 3 cases per 100,000 patient years. So it's very rare. Now, the second important thing is transaminitis in liver. So mild transient elevation of ALT occurs in 0.5 to 2% of patients. However, irreversible liver damage or acute liver failure due to statins are exceptionally rare, and the studies say it's more likely it's an idiosyncratic effect. And so much so in the FDA in 2020, they have changed the safety label. So they have recommended changing the safety label against routine serum liver test monitoring. So usually so at the beginning of statins, there was a need to put a statement saying so this can give rise to transaminitis, and you have to do a liver ALT before starting statin, but that is changed from 2012. And what I am talking about, the liver effects and statins, is so I have gone through the latest American Association for Study of Liver Disease 2020 review as well, and I do have a very senior pharmacology professor in our department, Professor Anuradha Dasanayak, and he also has given me a lot of inputs with regard to talking about the liver and statins. Right? So I want to stress you that statins are remarkably safe in liver disease. Right? So we should not refrain from giving statins if it is indicated thinking of a possible liver injury. And especially in the important other point is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or fatty liver disease, they can have elevated liver enzymes, but actually that is not a reason not to give statins to them. If at all, if you give statins to them, they might even reduce the elevated liver enzyme level even. So the only problem we have is statins have not been adequately tested directly in NASH patients, because previously it was there was a worry about statin causing liver damage, but now there are about 4 randomized clinical trials going on assessing this. However, we have observational studies, and it shows in chronic liver cell disease patients, cirrhotic patients and pre-cirrhotic patients. In retrospective cohort studies, they have found that in these, we'll say, cirrhotic patients who had been on statins for cholesterol lowering effect as a cardiovascular risk protection, and in the analysis of these retrospective cohort studies, they have found that actually the people who had been on statins had a reduced risk of disease progression of cirrhosis, and it reduced the frequency of hepatic decompensation, and it also has reduced occurrence of hepatocellular carcinoma and liver-related deaths. Now actually, and now so all these are retrospective cohort study evidences. Now they are now few randomized controlled trials are is undergoing. Right. So statins are safe in liver. That was something I wanted to tell. Right. And talking about other statin-related side effects, this is relatively a new information. So there is an increased risk of new onset diabetes with statins. Actually, so this is a dose-related effect. And so if the patient is on a high dose of a statin, and if they were on a high intensity statin, and if they were elderly, or if they had other metabolic risk factors like diabetes or fatty liver disease, then they are at increased risk of developing new onset diabetes mellitus. However, having said that, for this like one case of diabetes to appear, you need to treat 255 patients for over 4 years. That is the estimation. And then like according to whatever the data, we know that statins have a lot of good effects, and that this is a minor bad effect. So when we look at the dose that we are using and the intensity of statins, the benefits are more than the risk. So thinking of the risk of developing diabetes, we should not de-prescribe statins in a patient. So that's the message. Yes, there is a slight increased risk, but the risk is very much less compared to the benefits you get with a statin. And the other statin associated side effect that I want to let you know is that there is an increased risk of hemorrhagic stroke. This is again in like observational studies, they have found that statins, especially the low cholesterol, is associated with intracerebral hemorrhages. However, meta-analysis gives conflicting evidence. So some says that these statins do increase intracerebral hemorrhages, whereas some meta-analysis is against that. Therefore, we need randomized controlled trials to see the exact association between statins and hemorrhagic stroke. However, again, when we look at the benefits and risk, the risks are far more compared, the benefits are far more compared to the very few risks. And so this is not a reason not to prescribe statin in high cardiovascular risk patients. Then this is again a relatively new side effect that we are hearing about statins, whether that have a effect on the kidneys. Actually, there's no clear evidence of either harm or benefit of statin on kidney, but increased frequency of proteinuria is reported with statins. Usually, this is again a dose-dependent one. So this is again a class effect. So proteinuria is seen with all the statins, but it is only the rosuvastatin that is studied in detail. So rosuvastatin 80 milligram dose has shown to cause proteinuria in 12% of patients. But with the doses that we use, we never use rosuvastatin 80 milligram, so the proteinuria risk is similar to the other statins. And then the studies, they have further found that this proteinuria is it's of tubular origin. It's not due to any damage to the kidneys. It's possibly due to reduced tubular reabsorption of proteins, and it is usually transitory. So in clinical trials, they have found the frequency is very low, right? And it is mostly not higher than the placebo. So we need not worry a lot about statin causing proteinuria in patients to date. Now, the other important thing about statins is that statins can cause drug interactions. It's because most of the statins are metabolized by cytochrome P450 system in the liver. So there can be drug interactions with enzyme induction and inhibition, because these drugs are also being metabolized to the same hepatic microsomal system. So we need to be careful when we give antifungal drugs, and especially clarithromycin and erythromycin and protease inhibitors. Right? So these are usually these are enzyme inhibitors, so that the statin, with a small dose, the effect could be high if we give with these drugs. And also statins, and there is also like drug interaction reported with calcium channel antagonists. And there are some other drugs that we don't we don't use it regularly, like so cyclosporine, danazol, amiodarone, ranolazine, grapefruit juice. But gemfibrozil, again, like so statin and gemfibrozil is associated with increased risk of myositis and rhabdomyolysis. That is a contraindication. Now, next important thing is like what if if there is statin intolerance? So what we need to do is we have to stop the statin and try again when symptoms have resolved. That's the first thing, like that the statin intolerance could be due to some other problem. But if that does not work, then the next is we have to reduce the dose within the same intensity group and try. So like if we were giving atorvastatin 40, we can bring it down to 20 and see. If that is also not working, then we have to change to a low intensity, so that then atorvastatin 10 is the next option. And if everything fails, then ezetimibe monotherapy is the way forward. I think, I'm going to finish with this slide. I told you the treatment for any dyslipidemia, it's a high intensity statin. If that is not adequate and if we are not reaching goals, then the next option is we can add ezetimibe. That's a cholesterol absorption inhibitor at the gastrointestinal tract. If that is also not adequate, then we can add another PCSK9 inhibitor, which is the final common pathway. And if nothing is working, and if the patients are statin intolerant, then we can go for ezetimibe. I think I have run out of time, so I'm going to stop at this point and hand over to Priyamali. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Chamila, Janakan sir. So the last part of this PLF, we'll be discussing about the dyslipidemia in different clinical settings. So Shamila also discussed the diabetic and metabolic syndrome, but I will be also touch on that. And it's a dyslipidemia in association with insulin resistant is common in patients with type 2 diabetes. All of us know that. And hyperinsulinemia, secondary to insulin resistant, is associated with hypertriglyceridemia, small dense LDL, high density, low higher HDL concentration. And the atherogenic dyslipidemia is one of the major risk factors for cardiovascular disease in people with type 2 diabetes and in people with abdominal obesity and insulin resistant or impaired glucose tolerance. It is not only with diabetes. So the recommendations, the lifestyle intervention, diet, weight loss, increased physical activity to improve the lipid levels in all patients with diabetes, irrespective of their age, risk factors or whatever. Then initiation of statin should be based upon cardiovascular risk rather than an LDL cholesterol level alone in both type 1 and type 2 diabetes patients and in patients with clinical atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. Statin therapy should be added to lifestyle intervention regardless of baseline lipid levels. The same slide discussed in Tamila's one, so I am going to skip that. So after intensification of statin therapy, if the goal is not reached, combination with ezetimibe should be considered to reach the goals in lipid lowering. So the common condition we all encounter is hypothyroidism. The primary mechanism for hypercholesteremia and hypothyroidism is accumulation of LDL cholesterol due to reduction in the number of cell surface receptors for LDL, resulting decreased catabolism of LDL. Moreover, decreased lipoprotein lipase activity is found in overt hypothyroidism, decrease in the clearance of triglyceride-rich lipoproteins. And in patients with overt hypothyroidism, there is an increase in serum total cholesterol, low density lipoprotein, ApoB, lipoprotein A, and possibly triglyceride levels. The most lipid abnormalities in patients with overt hypothyroidism will resolve with thyroid hormone replacement therapy. However, clinical trials to date have not shown a beneficial effect of thyroid hormone treatment on serum lipid levels in patients with subclinical hypothyroidism. The recommendations: all patients with hyperlipidemia should be screened for hypothyroidism before being given specific lipid lowering drug therapy. And in patients with subclinical hypothyroidism, that is TSH below 10, with associated hyperlipidemia, consider thyroxine treatment as a means of reducing low density lipoprotein levels. But the previous slide I showed you, there are no trials which were proven about this, but that recommends, actually this is an endocrine guidelines. If hypothyroidism is present, the patient should be first treated for 3 to 4 months with levothyroxine therapy. And if the serum lipid levels are still abnormal, then lipid lowering therapy may be indicated. Then we'll talk about the TIA and stroke. In patients with recent stroke or TIA and without known coronary artery disease, 80 mg of atorvastatin per day reduce the overall incidence of strokes and of cardiovascular events, despite a small increase in the incidence of hemorrhagic stroke. So it is still benefit to use high-dose statin. Next, it's a heart failure and valvular heart disease. Statins have clearly shown to reduce the incidence of heart failure in patients with prior coronary artery disease, which was stable CAD or history of acute coronary syndrome. But there is no evidence that statins can prevent heart failure of non-ischemic origin. And there is insufficient evidence to suggest that statins will slow the progression of aortic valve stenosis. So what they recommend, initiation of lipid lowering therapy is not recommended in patients with heart failure in the absence of other indications for their use. Initiation of lipid lowering treatment in patients with aortic valvular stenosis without coronary artery disease to slow progression of aortic valve stenosis in the absence of other indication for their use is also not recommended. Then the common one we all experience is the chronic kidney disease. So primary lipid abnormality seen in CKD patient is elevated triglyceride levels and low HDL level and excess of small dense LDL particles also seen with these patients. And patients with CKD have a much higher risk of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease and CV mortality rate compared with patients with normal renal functions. So the recommendations, patients with chronic kidney disease who have established ASCVD should receive maximally tolerated statin therapy similar to patients with established ASCVD disease who do not have CKD. We should not reduce the dose because they are CKD. The use of statin therapy may be benefit patients with non-dialysis dependent stage 3 to 5 CKD even in the absence of other ASCVD. Then in patients with dialysis dependent CKD who are free of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease and who are not already on statin therapy, newly commencement of statin therapy is not recommended. And in patient already on statin, ezetimibe or statin or ezetimibe, combination at the time of dialysis initiation, continuation of these drugs should be considered, particularly in patients with ASCVD. And the transplantation, statin should be considered as first-line agents in transplant patients. Initiation should be at low doses with careful up titration and with caution regarding potential drug interactions, particularly for patients on cyclosporine. Then in patients who are intolerant of statin of those with significant dyslipidemia, despite maximally tolerated statin treatment, alternative or additional therapy with ezetimibe may be considered. This slide actually just a slide regarding statins and CKD, the same slide Chandla discussed. The proteinuria actually, we expect it's a rosuvastatin more than 80, but we don't use that much statins. So then it comes peripheral arterial disease and carotid arterial disease. In patients with peripheral arterial disease, lipid lowering therapy, including a maximum tolerated dose of statin plus ezetimibe or a combination with PCSK9 inhibitor if needed, is recommended to reduce the risk of ASCVD event. That is both in peripheral arterial disease plus carotid arterial disease. And then the condition called familial hyperlipidemia. Even though we don't diagnose much, we are come across with these patients day to day. And the diagnosis of familial hyperlipidemia should be considered in patients with cardiac disease aged less than 55 for men, less than 60 years for women. In people with relatives with premature fatal or non-fatal cardiovascular disease, severely elevated LDL-C, that is in adult more than 190 LDL, children more than 150, and in first degree relatives of familial hyperlipidemic patients. And the screening should be offered to the family members of a confirmed patient with familial hyperlipidemia. Then familial hyperlipidemia patient with ASCVD or who have another major risk factor should be treated as other very high risk patient, and familial hyperlipidemia patient with no higher ASCVD or other risk factors should be treated as high risk. If the ASCVD is a very high, then others are high risk. So the recommendations, familial hyperlipidemic patients in the very high risk category should be treated with a single statin or combination lipid lowering therapy, that is statin plus ezetimibe, to achieve more than 50% of reduction of LDL-C from baseline and an LDL goal of less than 55. And the treatment with the PCSK9 inhibitor is also recommended in very high risk patients if the treatment goal is not achieved on a maximum tolerated statin plus ezetimibe. So it's older people, it's age more than 65. Treatment with statin is recommended for older people with ASCVD in the same way as for younger patients. The treatment with statin is recommended for primary prevention according to the level of risk in older people aged less than 75 years, because we have not studied people above 75. Initiation of statin treatment for primary prevention in older people aged more than 75 may be considered if at high risk or above. It is again individual basis, as Chandla said. It is recommended that the statin is started at a low dose if there is significant renal impairment and or the potential for drug interaction, and then titrated upward to achieve LDL-C treatment goals. So the last, it's the pregnancy and lactation. Lipid lowering drugs should not be given when pregnancy is planned, during pregnancy or during the breastfeeding period. However, for severe familial hyperlipidemic patients, bile acid sequestrant, which are not absorbed, and or LDL apheresis may be considered. So in summary, initiation of statin should be based upon cardiovascular risk rather than LDL cholesterol level alone in both type 1 and type 2 diabetes patients. Second, all patients with hyperlipidemia should be screened for hypothyroidism before being given specific lipid lowering drug therapy. Then high dose statin is indicated in TIA and stroke without coronary artery disease. Then initiation of lipid lowering therapy is not recommended in patients with heart failure and aortic valve stenosis in the absence of other indication for their use. Patients with CKD who have established ASCVD should receive maximally tolerated statin therapy, similar to patients with established ASCVD disease who do not have CKD. Then in patients with dialysis-dependent CKD who are free of ASCVD and who are not already on statins, nimbly commencement of statin is not recommended. Then the treatment with statin is recommended for older people with ASCVD in the same way as for younger patients. That ends the presentation. So we'll move to the questions and answers.
There is a question on hypertriglyceridemia management, which I was going to discuss but couldn't discuss due to the time constraints. Shall I quickly show one slide? Right. Management of hypertriglyceridemia. So there is no direct evidence to say hypertriglyceridemia is associated with cardiovascular events. But if you look at, like, analyze the studies, like, so all the patients have been on a statin. Statins do reduce LDL as well as triglycerides. And there, if you calculate with the reduction of triglyceride level, you have seen some benefit in cardiovascular risk reduction, but you can't attribute it 100% to the triglyceride reduction in the triglyceride level. So whatever the hyperlipidemia, treat for cardiovascular protection treatment, even if they have hypertriglyceridemia, the treatment is a statin. But if you are worried about pancreatitis due to hypertriglyceridemia, that's a different issue. And then, so hypertriglyceridemia again can be divided into three main groups, like it's mild if it is less than 200 milligrams, moderate, we take it from 200 to 500, and we take it severe if it is more than 500. What it says, like we'll say there is hypertriglyceridemia, you do not go by the triglyceride level per se, you take the cardiovascular risk of the patient and then you start them on a statin. But with that statin also, if the triglyceride is not under control, right, the next option is, like, you can add a omega-3 fatty acid, because that reduces both LDL as well as triglycerides slightly. But then if once, like, if the patient is at cardio LDL goal with the statin, then if you want to add something to reduce the triglyceride level, then the option is a fenofibrate. I hope this answers the questions a lot of people have posted on hypertriglyceridemia. I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, there is a question of age, with several questions actually, whether we can treat the younger age group. Now, it is not usually recommended as a routine screening process to screen younger people, but if you are suspecting familial hypercholesterolemia, and then if we, depending on the heart, the history of heart attacks and things like in the family, then you can screen the younger people, so they are not in the general guidelines. And in familial hypercholesterolemia, you have to treat younger people. So there's no age limit in that case.
Something, Janaka, what they
Yeah.
say is, in a childhood, if you think familial hyperlipidemia, you screen them, and above the age of 10 years, if they are at high risk, you can start statin. Age given is as 10.
Yeah.
And there is a question about whether atorvastatin 80 milligram, whether that is okay to use in Sri Lankans. So the trial evidence from West is for use up to 80 milligrams atorvastatin. But in our case, like we don't have direct trials done in Sri Lanka, but I think there is evidence from Indian trials that even with 40 milligrams of statins, we we get the required risk reduction and we achieve the cholesterol targets we want. And but having said that, we have to remember the South Asians do have a high risk of developing cardiovascular diseases. But at the same time, we do have, we are more sensitive to statin. So mainly it's the Japanese people who are very much sensitive to statins. But I think Asian people, they are more sensitive to statins. That may be why we can, like, we get the required risk reduction with probably atorvastatin 40 milligrams.
Yeah,
Yes.
that was the consensus that we had in most of the meetings as well. No, all the ministry guideline committee and the CCP, that 40 should be adequate. That was the consensus. Then there's this question of ALT level more than around 300 and very high risk of LDL level. I think Chamila will answer that. My opinion is that very high risk means now all this cardiovascular risk, we give 10-year risk. Now in this patient, if the ALT is 300, there's an immediate risk of liver injury. So probably statin can wait till the liver thing is sorted out. Chamila will give a clear answer.
So like, so the question about ALT, if the ALT is 300, then I think so that's the good about we doing a ALT level before starting statins. I think we have to, so if the ALT is 300, we can do the basic test to look at like whether there is any other reason for high liver enzymes, like whether the patient, the history is also important, whether they are on like drugs that can increase the liver enzymes. And if everything is normal and if the patient is having fatty liver disease, then most likely it could be due to that. I think, I mean, we can take a chance and start statin in that sort of a patient, and we have to monitor them. And most likely, I mean, so if we have excluded other reasons for a fatty elevated liver enzymes, then the chances of, like, I mean, the statins increase in liver enzymes are less, and then more likely it will reduce the liver enzymes, because like they have said, like this the statin and the liver injury is sort of an idiosyncratic reaction, so you can't go exactly by the ALT level. And then, so, but there are situations like some say like a drug in, so the statin can precipitate autoimmune hepatitis if that patient was like if the patient was at risk of autoimmune, so like if some autoimmune hepatitis, so if there is a, so that risk we can't predict by, so it is not exactly because we started statins. Even without starting the statin, if that patient was to have autoimmune hepatitis, I think they can develop it during the course. But then, like, I mean, so 300, if we have excluded any other reason for high elevated liver enzymes, and if we think it is most likely due to fatty liver disease, then we can start on statin. That's my opinion.
Yeah, what I feel is also, now if the ALT is 300, I am a bit scared to diagnose fatty liver in this patient. I would go for other things first. That's my personal thing, because ALT, fatty liver, usually what they say with the ALT is, or the liver enzyme more than 4 times, it should be less than 4 times to start a statin. When it is more than 4 times, you have to always be worried of some other reason.
Like, so that's why, like, so I mean, if the patient is completely normal, for them to have something else is very unlikely. But if we can unmute, I think Anuradha Dasanayake sir is in the
he can give a better
audience. He can like give us a better opinion, I guess.
Yes,
We can't talk. And there's a question regarding hypothyroidism. Someone is asking if cholesterol is more than 300 and LDL for 3 months to start statin. But it's actually guidelines and recommendation just us to follow, but we have to individually assess the patient. If we think that patient has ACVD high risk, yes, you can start, but definitely treating hypothyroidism will reduce the cholesterol. So you can wait if there's no much risk.
Yeah,
yeah. Can you hear me? Can you?
Yes. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So that the answer to that question is whether the patient is symptomatic or asymptomatic. If the patient is symptomatic, then basically the patient should have other cause for liver enzyme elevation, because usually NASH or fatty liver is patient, even if the ALT is 300, they are asymptomatic. If they are asymptomatic and 300, if you have excluded all other causes, then if it remains around 300, the patient needs a liver biopsy. And if the liver biopsy says it is a fatty liver or NASH, then still you can start a statin, even if that is above 300. But the clue is if the patient is symptomatic or asymptomatic. If the patient is symptomatic, the patient is most likely to have another cause for liver disease, like autoimmune or Hep B or Hep C or whatever. If they are asymptomatic, all other liver diseases have been excluded. Still, if it's 300, you need a biopsy. Then if the biopsy says fatty liver, then you can, with all the other lifestyle modifications, then you can start a statin. Do you
Thank
all
you.
agree with me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So, in the absence of any questions, and we have answered most of the questions that were raised, and may I thank all the three panelists, Dr. Janaka, Dr. Chamila Mettananda, and Dr. Priyamali, for your very resourceful presentations. And thank you very much for all the preparations and joining us. And on behalf of the college, I also thank the participants. We had closer to 40 participants right throughout, and we had a very resourceful and interacting discussion at the end. And thank you, Anuradha, for giving you expert opinion as well. And at the end, may I thank the Gets Pharma, who are the sponsors for providing us this tech support and the Zoom links. And thank you, Gets Pharma, Saman and the clan. And thank you all for joining us. And until we meet again in another webinar soon. And good afternoon to all of you. Thank you.